Ever get this feeling like, whoa, current events are straight out of a prophecy? That's the vibe I'm getting from this document you want us to unpack. It's about Sister Agnes Katsuko Sasagawa, a Japanese nun known for some intense visions and messages, linked to Our Lady of Akita, Leda Kyo. That's Mary, Mother of Jesus, for anyone not up on their Catholic terms.
And to be clear, we're talking about apparitions.
Yeah.
Where someone claims to see Mary, right? These things have been reported for centuries, often with prophecies attached. It's a fascinating mix of faith and, well,
Yeah.
let's just say people interpret these things in very different ways.
Right, and this document definitely leans into the we're at a crossroads kind of prophecy, claiming all connects to what's happening in Venezuela right now. But before we get into all that, maybe we should start with Sister Sasagawa herself. Her life story is pretty incredible, even before we get to the visions and all that.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine this. Born prematurely back in 1931, dealing with health issues her whole life. Then, at 19, she becomes partially paralyzed because of a medical error during surgery. And this isn't a short-term thing. Sister Sasagawa lived with this for 16 years. Talk about resilience, right?
No, it's almost hard to imagine going through all that, especially at such a young age. It makes you wonder how someone even begins to cope.
Well, for Sister Sasagawa, it was during this time,
Right.
while she was being treated in a clinic, that she met a pivotal person, a nurse named Mr. Drew. Mr. Drew was a devout Catholic, and that faith had a profound impact on Sister Sasagawa. Not only did her health start improving under Mr. Drew's care, but she also found a sense of peace and hope in Catholicism, eventually deciding to convert.
Wow, talk about a turning point. So even though she had pushback from her family, she was dead set on dedicating her life to God, right?
Absolutely. She ended up joining the congregation of the Handmaids of the Immaculate Heart of Mary in Nagasaki in 1969. This is a huge decision, marking the start of her life as a nun.
And it's like her dedication was tested almost immediately, right? I mean, her health struggles didn't magically disappear just because she became a nun. Didn't she lose her hearing at some point?
You're right. It's like life threw another curveball at her. In 1973, Sister Sasagawa lost her hearing, and the diagnosis wasn't good. Progressive hearing loss with a very slim chance of getting it back. But true to form, Sister Sasagawa persevered. She learned to read lips so she could keep communicating, which to me speaks volumes about her strength and her commitment to her faith.
But get this. In 1974, things took a really wild turn. Picture this. Sister Sasagawa is in the chapel for morning Eucharist adoration, and she claims to have encountered an angel who delivers this life-changing message.
And it wasn't just any message. The angel supposedly told her that her hearing would temporarily come back between August and October of that same year. Now, whether or not you believe in this sort of thing, what happened next is hard to ignore. Her hearing miraculously returned, just as the angel had predicted, although it only lasted about 6 months.
That's wild. I mean, talk about a test of faith that makes you think about how you would react in that situation.
And the story doesn't end there. In 1982, the angel reappeared with another promise. This time, complete and permanent restoration of Sister Sasagawa's hearing, thanks to the Virgin Mary's intervention. And guess what? It happened.
No way. So she regained her hearing because of something this angel said.
That's incredible. Are you telling me these sorts of things were happening all around her?
It seems like it. And this is where the story takes on an even more, let's say, extraordinary dimension. We're talking mysterious lights emanating from the tabernacle. A cloud of angels surrounding the altar. Sister Sasagawa claimed to have witnessed angelic beings, received messages through them, even experienced stigmata, which for those listening who don't know, stigmata means wounds mirroring those of Christ's crucifixion.
Okay, hold on, stigmata. That's taking things to a whole other level. And I am guessing this all ties into these Akita apparitions everyone keeps mentioning. You've got it. These reported events, as incredible as they seem, were like a prelude to what would become known as the apparitions of Our Lady of Akita. This is when Sister Sasagawa claimed to receive messages directly from the Virgin Mary herself.
Okay, so we've got Sister Sasagawa, her incredible life story, these reported miracles, and then these messages from Mary herself. What I am really curious about is this document's claim that it all relates to Venezuela. What is it about Venezuela that has people making these connections?
That's where things get really interesting. You see, this document isn't subtle. It lays out 8 very specific points connecting things happening in Venezuela to the core messages Sister Sasagawa shared.
Ooh, 8 points, like a checklist of prophecy coming true. Give me the rundown. What's number 1?
The document starts strong, emphasizing the need for repentance. Remember those warnings we talked about? The potential for calamities if humanity doesn't change its ways. This document argues that the world, and Venezuela specifically, has strayed too far from God Their solution, genuine repentance.
So it's like they're saying Venezuela's problems, the political unrest, the economic struggles, all stem from this spiritual deficit.
That's how they're framing it. And it's not just about personal repentance either. The document seems to imply that Venezuela, as a nation, needs some kind of spiritual reset.
That's a pretty intense claim. Okay, what's next on this prophecy checklist?
Environmental destruction. The document connects Sister Sasagawa's warnings about potential environmental catastrophes to very real issues facing Venezuela. Think deforestation, pollution, that kind of thing. But it's not just presented as straightforward environmental damage. It's framed as a symptom of this deeper spiritual crisis.
Right, so it's like polluting the planet is also a sign of a polluted soul, right?
Right.
We are disrespecting God's creation, and there will be consequences. It's a pretty common theme when you think about it.
You're right, this idea of the connection between our actions and divine judgment isn't new. And it speaks to something we see a lot with Marian apparitions. They often act as these calls to reevaluate our relationship with God, with each other, and with the world around us. They emphasize this interconnectedness between spirituality, morality, and the environment.
Okay, so we've got the need for repentance, we've got the environment. What else is on this list of warning signs?
Well, the document spends a lot of time on the importance of prayer. Now, obviously, prayer is central to many faiths, but it takes on this extra weight here. It's presented almost like a weapon against the potential calamities Sister Sasagawa warned about.
And they're saying the rosary in particular is key here, right? I mean, Venezuela does have a significant Catholic population.
Right. It's like they're issuing this call to action, urging people to harness the power of prayer, specifically the rosary, as a way to protect themselves and their nation.
This is heavy stuff. Okay, what's next on this prophecy checklist?
The document then highlights what it calls a lack of unity, both within the church itself and in society at large. It suggests that this division, this inability to find common ground, makes humanity more susceptible to the very calamities that Sister Sasagawa warned about.
And I'm guessing they draw a direct line to the political climate in Venezuela, right? I mean, they've had their share of turmoil and unrest in recent years.
Exactly. They point to the polarization, the social and political unrest, as evidence of this spiritual rift. It's like they're urging people to look beyond their differences, to remember their shared humanity, especially in the face of this perceived crisis of faith.
So it's not just about praying more, it's about praying together, about finding strength and unity through shared faith.
Precisely. It's about tapping into that collective spiritual power.
Okay, what else is on the list?
Next up is a big one. A perceived crisis of morals and ethics, which the document claims is running rampant globally, but is particularly evident in Venezuela. It goes back to that earlier theme of repentance, this idea that we've strayed from the path, that we're no longer living up to the moral standards set by God.
Right, it's like humanity's moral compass is broken, and it's leading us down a dangerous path. And Venezuela, they're saying, is like the poster child for this moral decline.
That's one way to interpret it. It's a familiar theme in prophetic or apocalyptic literature.
Yeah.
You see this idea that humanity's downfall is directly tied to its moral decay.
Okay, that's 5 down, 3 to go. What's next?
Well, looping back to the environment for a moment, the next point focuses specifically on the destruction of nature. It's like they're hammering home this idea that how we treat the planet is directly tied to our spiritual state.
Right, so it's not just about saving the rainforest, it's about saving our souls.
Exactly. They're making a connection between environmental degradation and spiritual emptiness. It's all intertwined.
Okay, what are the last 2 points on their prophecy checklist?
The seventh point is a direct and urgent appeal for prayer, specifically for Venezuela. It's like they've laid out all these problems, all these warning signs, and now they're saying, okay, here's what you can do. They're urging people to turn to prayer as a source of strength, guidance, and hope for Venezuela's future.
It's like they believe that focused, collective prayer can somehow shift the course of events.
That's the idea. And then the final point emphasizes the importance of protecting the family unit. They seem to be suggesting that the family is under attack, that its weakening is both a symptom and a cause of this larger spiritual crisis they've been outlining.
So a strong, faithful family equals a strong, faithful society.
You got it. It's about reinforcing those traditional values and structures as a way to combat this perceived moral and spiritual decline.
Okay, wow, we just went through a lot. 8 points, each one connecting Sister Sasagawa's prophecies to the situation in Venezuela. I have to be honest, it's a lot to wrap my head around. It's one thing to list these points to see how they're being connected. It's another thing to actually understand what it all means.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. It's so easy to get swept up in the drama of prophecies, especially when they're presented in such a compelling way.
Totally. But we need to take a step back, look at all of this objectively.
Exactly. For instance, how do these 8 points line up with themes we see in other Marian apparitions? Are these unique to Sister Sasagawa and Akita? Or do they tap into these broader, maybe even universal anxieties?
That's such a good point, because if these same themes pop up again and again in different apparitions across different cultures, it makes you wonder, are these specific predictions, or are they more like timeless warnings, these echoes of human fear and hope that transcend time and place?
Right. It's also important to remember that people interpret these kinds of claims in very different ways,
Yeah.
depending on their existing beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. Like someone who's skeptical of religious prophecies might hear all of this and think it's just fear-mongering. But someone who already believes, this could be all the evidence they need that we're living in the end times.
And that's where something called confirmation bias comes into play. Let's say you lose your keys. Confirmation bias is like when you only look for them in the places you think they should be, even if they're somewhere else entirely. We tend to seek out and favor information that confirms what we already believe.
So if you're already looking for signs of the apocalypse, you're more likely to find them. Whether or not they're really there, it's like seeing what you want to see. Okay, so we need to be aware of our own biases, ask ourselves tough questions, and not just accept things at face value. But going back to this document's main claim, I'm still stuck on this idea that Venezuela is somehow fulfilling Sister Sasagawa's prophecies. It's like they're saying, see, look at Venezuela, this is proof. But are they really providing solid evidence? Are these connections legit, or are they stretching things to fit their narrative?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
To really dig into this, we need to talk about what's been going on in Venezuela. And it's been a rough few decades, no sugarcoating it.
Right. There's been a lot of talk about economic problems, political instability, that sort of thing. What's the real story there?
Imagine this. Hyperinflation so bad, your currency is practically worthless. People struggling to afford basic necessities, food shortages, medicine shortages, the whole 9 yards. And on top of that, there's this constant power struggle between the government and the opposition, each blaming the other for the mess. It's a pressure cooker of problems. And it's impacting everyday Venezuelans in incredibly difficult ways.
So it's clearly a complicated situation with a whole bunch of factors at play, but how does this document try to connect all of that, all of those very real problems, back to Sister Sasagawa's prophecies? What specifically are they pointing to?
That's the thing. The document is pretty vague when it comes to specifics. They use these broad terms like destruction of nature, crisis of morals and ethics, division within society. And honestly, you could apply those labels to a lot of places dealing with tough times. It's almost like they're taking these big picture prophecies and trying to force them onto Venezuela's situation without really acknowledging the complexity of what's happening on the ground.
It's like they see a country struggling and say, aha, prophecy fulfilled,
Yeah.
without taking the time to understand the nuances of the situation.
Exactly. And that's where it gets tricky, because if you look at Venezuela's recent history, their struggles aren't happening in a vacuum. There's a whole chain of events that have led them to this point.
Yeah.
We're talking years of economic mismanagement, deep-rooted political corruption, massive social inequality. To just boil it all down to this idea of a spiritual failing, as this document seems to do, is a massive oversimplification.
It's like saying they're not praying hard enough, that's why their economy is in trouble,
Yeah.
without acknowledging the systemic issues at play.
Exactly. And that's not to say that faith doesn't play a role in people's lives.
Yeah.
Or how they make sense of hardship, but to claim that Venezuela's problems are solely, or even primarily, the result of straying from God's path, well, that's a whole different conversation.
It all goes back to what we were talking about earlier, confirmation bias. If you already believe that prophecies are coming true, it's really easy to fit those beliefs onto current events, even if there are other, more logical explanations. So what are we supposed to do with all of this? How do we, as people just trying to make sense of the world, sort through this kind of information? How do we know what to believe?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think it starts with approaching information, especially information that claims to have these huge stakes. With a healthy dose of skepticism, question everything. Don't just take someone's word for it. Even if they present themselves as an expert or an authority, do your own research, read critically, and most importantly, think for yourself.
Don't just blindly accept things, especially when it comes to something as potentially powerful as faith.
Right. And remember, there's a big difference between having faith and being intellectually passive. You can be a person of faith and still ask tough questions. Still be critical of how faith is being used. especially when it's being used to explain complex global events.
Well, here we are again, another deep dive finished. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the extraordinary life of Sister Sasagawa, to the prophecies she shared, to the very real and complex situation unfolding in Venezuela. It's a lot to process.
It is. And as always, our goal isn't to give you definitive answers, but to give you the information and the different perspectives you need to form your own conclusions.
Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. Not just accepting things at face value, but really grappling with these big questions, these mysteries that have captivated humanity for centuries.
Well said. Whether or not you believe in prophecies, Sister Sasagawa's story, the interpretations of her messages, it all circles back to this idea of responsibility. We have responsibility to create a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world.
Whether you're motivated by faith, by a sense of social justice, or just a desire to leave the planet better than you found it, those are values we can all get behind. And who knows, maybe that's the most powerful message of all. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions. Keep exploring the world with open minds. And we'll be right here, ready for another deep dive.